Let's see some Patriots breaking news now. They've announced the official titles for all their they've announced their assistant coaching staff for the season. I don't see Evan's name on this list. So you can rule that one out.
That's true. I'm not going to the coaching staff. Mike Pellegrino did make a joke towards me that I could join the coaching staff. I don't think he was being serious. I think he was kind of jabbing.
Well, you're not listed here, so
yeah,
there you go.
I'm not listed there. That's true. All right. Let's talk a little bit about training camp, though. We can reminisce.
Might as well, right?
On our own time. So we have plenty of time to do that. But here, did you see where was it like the media guide or something like that? Here we go. I got it.
A bunch of people just tweeted.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll start here. This wasn't where I was going to start, but I think it's worth starting here since this is important. Joe Judge officially listed as the offensive assistant / quarterbacks coach now. Matt Patricia, senior football advisor / O-line coach, and Steve Belichick and Jerod Mayo are both just linebackers coaches. No inside outside anymore labels, and no O coordinator, no D coordinator as expected. But I think the defensive side of the ball has been in place now for a couple of years, so that's not a surprise or anything. Offensively, though, go ahead.
Just the one interesting thing there, and you just mentioned this, there's no, like, it's not inside outside linebackers coach for Steve Belichick and Jerod Mayo, right? It had been in the past. I think Jerod was inside, Steve was outside. They've got a lot of guys that in theory could do both and they've had that in the past, but I think this year especially, they've got a lot of guys that could do both. Josh Uche, Ronnie Perkins said he could probably do it a little bit. I think Mac Wilson's a guy who can maybe give you some snaps in that regard. I think Raekwon McMillan's a guy who could give you some snaps in that regard. And that's something I've kind of been wondering heading into camp here is, we kind of look at the inside linebacker spot and the edge spot, and we've looked at them very separately in the context of this team the last few years, and the personnel sort of dictated that. Remember when we got all worked up about Chase Winovich playing middle linebacker against the Ravens, right? I wonder if this is a sign that there's going to be more the personnel is going to be more interchangeable between those two roles this year. And it adds to that positionless defense thing, right? So that's kind of interesting to me. It doesn't say anything definitively, but to kind of take that inside-outside designation away, there's obviously a purpose to that. Everything has a purpose. I find that a little interesting. That catches my attention for sure.
Yeah. Let's move over to the offense side, though, because that was a good synopsis of that. On offense, Joe Judge is now being labeled with the quarterbacks, right? He is the quarterbacks coach for the season. Yeah. Not even like assistant. He's just the quarterbacks coach. This goes back to something that I was going to bring up anyways, because it's clearly a top storyline heading into training camp. Not just who's calling plays, but just who's running the show, right? On the offensive side of the football, because I think in a lot of times, in a lot of instances, you do worry about having too many voices in Mac Jones in particular's head, where Joe Judge is working with them, Patricia's working with them, Belichick's working with them, and there has to be a unified message to the quarterback. So if Joe Judge is the quarterback's coach, and I've been on this take for a while now, and this just cements it for me because they're actually labeling him the quarterback's coach, then he's going to be the one that's going to be working with Mac 24/7, right? He's going to be attached to Mac Jones's hip. He's going to be with him during positional drills. He's going to be with him during meetings, during film, during install, like whatever. If he's going to be with him all that time, and Matt Patricia is going to be with the offensive lineman, it still does not make sense to me from a streamlined perspective that then they're going to get to Sunday and Matt Patricia is going to have the play sheet. That's to me seems like the exact thing that I would worry about with this, which is too many voices inside Mac Jones's head. So I think that in a lot of ways, just based off of the history of coaching and what you see other teams do, and I know Belichick doesn't always go with what other teams do, but when you see the history of how this usually works, even with Bill, the quarterback's coach has got to be the play caller, right? It just seems like it would be way too confusing, honestly, is the best way to put it, to have a bunch of different voices in the pot there. What do you make of these designations, and are you kind of on the same line of thinking there?
Well, so you mentioned Joe Judge labeled a quarterbacks coach. He's also, I think it was offensive assistant. The text is just really small on this, and it's not in any sort of logical order.
And it's definitely on purpose that we have to
He told us in the spring, Judge did, that he was going to work with all the skill position players, right? So that still opens the door for that. So the whole, with Mac Jones 24/7, I don't think that's locked in by him being the quarterback's coach. And what's interesting is there's no definitive second quarterback's coach, right? There's no Bo Hardigree. Now, there is, and this is interesting, Evan Rothstein is listed as an offensive assistant.
I just got to the bottom of this list.
Just saw that. Yeah, they snuck it in there. So for people who don't know who Evan Rothstein is, he came with Matt Patricia from Detroit. They were in Detroit together. They left Detroit together. Or Rothstein may have made it through that season. I don't know. Patricia was fired midway through the season, but they both, started with the Patriots similar time. And Rothstein was basically Patricia's Ernie Adams in Detroit. Yeah. He's a deep dive. We don't really know what he does. Director of football research kind of guy. So offensive assistant doesn't mean anything, right? It doesn't mean anything on the surface, and he'll probably still have his hand in everything because that's why they brought him in. It really seemed like he was brought in as kind of the heir apparent to Ernie Adams.
Yeah.
But as an offensive assistant, if you do have a guy that you think is that bright of a mind, you may want him spending some time with the quarterback.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know that he would be a quarterback's coach in the same way that Bo Hardigree was, but maybe that's your guy that's at max hip. Now, he like I just said, he has other responsibilities too. So I don't know exactly what that looks like. But I think that they labeled him, and I want to pull up what his role was last year because it was not offensive assistant.
Yeah, it's interesting while you're pulling that up because you mentioned that he could be a guy that could be in Mac's ear or helping Mac out. I know you're going to hate hearing this, Alex, but with Rothstein's background of being a very analytical type of guy, it is interesting that maybe he could be somebody like what we've heard with Belichick in the past that's kind of dissecting the other defense for a quarterback, right? And saying, this is their tendencies. This is what they do. This is the coverage that they run. It's 3rd and 7. Their go-to coverage is X, right? Or it's 2nd and 8, and their go-to coverage is Y. Those are the types of things that people like Ernie Adams do. That's the infamous Malcolm Butler interception in Do Your Job, where he talks about how he logged that play, earlier in film study. Like, that's the type of stuff that Evan Rothstein does. So it's definitely possible if he's on the offensive side of the ball that he's there for game plan purposes, for those types of little details that Belichick also often talks with the quarterbacks about as well. But maybe it's just another layer there for Evan Rothstein. It's very interesting that he's now officially on the coaching staff.
So here's his resume. He was with he went to SUNY Cortland. That's tough for us as Ithaca guys here. Hey, you know what? Whatever. Still the greatest ending. Cortica 2014, still the greatest ending to a football game I've ever seen. So he spent 2 seasons as an offensive QC at Syracuse.
Yes.
As well as, and he was with their video operations department. Then, so 2 seasons there. Then he went to the Lions. He was the special teams QC. Then he was the team's, oh boy, here we go. You ready? He was the team's special projects coach in 2014.
That I think was literally Ernie's title at one point in time.
No, he was at one point. Ernie's, for the majority of his career, was the director of football research. But
so at one point
that doesn't mean anything.
So Michael Lombardi,
projects coach.
Special projects was Michael Lombardi as well in the 2014
That sounds right.
Patriots.
Yeah.
Yes.
So then he goes from special teams QC, quality control. He's the team's special projects coach for 1 year. Then it says promoted. So I guess we don't know what special projects mean, but supposedly this is a step up. Was promoted to offensive assistant / research and analysis.
Sure.
From 15 to 17. And then
for the math.
2 years after that, he was the head coach assistant of research and analysis. So maybe start doing more on the defensive side of the ball. Then he didn't have a title. He was just there. It says Rothstein worked with the coaching staff in all facets of preparation for the team's weekly opponents, in addition to assisting head coach Matt Patricia. That was 18 to 20. And then he came to New England, and last year his title was just research and analysis / coaching.
Right.
So all over the place.
So what he does is very similar to what Ernie did.
Right.
But now he's officially on the coaching staff, which tells you that they, in my mind, they're going to use him for game planning. I don't think that this is the guy that's going to be, working on Mac Jones's footwork and quarterback drills, right? I think this is going to be the guy that really talks about tendencies for the other team and scouts the other team and does a deep dive into that sort of thing. So very interesting coaching staff developments. As I mentioned, the setup right now.
So one more thing I want to add,
Yeah.
and I just want to parrot something I heard Scott Zolak say on 98.5 The Sports Hub this morning, but it was very interesting. There's been a lot of some comparisons made to the last time Bill didn't have an OC or a DC, which was in Cleveland.
Yeah.
Right. And then early on where that came from, there was actually a similar setup with Parcells at one point here when Zoe played here. And what he said was what would happen sometimes, especially in key situations in the game, or just whenever he felt like it, Parcells would go to whoever was calling the plays and say, hey, run it. Hey, let's go. Hey, they can't stop the run it. Hey, they're really biting. Let's go play action. Hey, we should throw here. Hey, let's go run past these next two, right? And Zoe kind of insinuated it could be something like that. And that's really interesting where you may have a play caller calling the actual, let's go, spread Y right, spider to Y banana, which I don't know if that's in their playbook or not at this point. The Bruins hired somebody named John Gruden yesterday. Spider to Y banana has been in my head. It might be a coach that's saying, hey, let's go spider to Y banana here. But they're saying that because Bill said to them, hey, I want to go play action right now.
Right.
And that would make a lot of sense, right?
Yeah.
For them to do at this point where you have somebody choosing the exact play, but Bill still is kind of picking the overall philosophy, the overall theme of the offense. Maybe he's the one coming up with the script, the first 10 plays of the game, the first whatever it is plays of the half, right? I heard Zoe say that today. That makes a ton of sense. That would make a lot of sense for it to be that sort of operation on both offense and defense. Hey, let's blitz here. Hey, we've kind of given them this look. We've kind of given them a bunch of single high here. Let's try cover three and just drop a cover three in here and see how they react. And then a different coach picks the actual assignment. That makes a lot of sense. So that would be interesting.
From what I've heard, the 2019 season on the defensive side of the ball was a lot like that, right? Because Brian Flores takes a job with the Miami Dolphins after Super Bowl 53, and they go with the Steve Belichick, Jerod Mayo tandem. And it wasn't really until around halfway through 2019 that Steve really started to take the play sheet. And at that point, that was definitely a way of how they did things, right? Where Bill was kind of coming in over the top and being like, hey, we've kind of played coverage. Let's blitz here, right? We played coverage the whole game. Maybe we catch them with a blitz here and catch them by surprise. Whereas then maybe like you were saying, the actual call is maybe made off of a sheet that's got a few selections there for Steve Belichick based off the game install, based off the game plan of the 4 or 5 blitzes that they like against that opponent. So it's a way of kind of, it's a succession line, right? It's a lack of a better way of putting it. It's kind of dumbing it down for the play caller where he doesn't have as much of that run pass or blitz coverage type of analysis to get into. And it's more like, this is what we're doing. You pick the play out of the hat that we're running based off of that. And that's a good way of looking at it. I think that would be a really interesting way of doing it. I am not by any means ruling out Bill Belichick himself calling plays at some point on the offensive side of the ball. We know one thing from Bill, and you can tell based off of this coaching staff, there's no actual title, OC or DC. He's not going to just hand out responsibilities just because somebody's got to do it, right? If he doesn't feel like somebody is up for it, ready for it, whatever you want to put up, call it, he's not going to put that responsibility on somebody that's not ready for it. So if he doesn't feel like Matt Patricia or Joe Judge or Troy Brown gets into it or Nick Caley gets into it or whatever the case may be, if they don't feel like they are ready for it, then I wouldn't rule out Bill himself calling the offensive plays and having the sheet. And I think that'd be really cool. I would love to see what a Bill Belichick called offense looks like. We know what a Bill Belichick defense looks like when he calls it, right? Well, what's a Bill Belichick offense look like? Like, what are his true philosophies? What was Josh McDaniels and what was, his influence and what was Bill's. Like, that was always the tough thing for me, was like, okay, like, they're conservative sometimes on 3rd and 4th down. But was that a Bill decision? Is that a Josh decision? Like, who's making those types of decisions? I think it's going to be really interesting to see if that's the way it goes. Just like, what is Bill Belichick, the OC? Like, what is his thing? What is he like doing? And that will be very, very interesting. And along these lines, not just about the responsibilities, we've talked a lot about the scheme itself. And honestly, they put this out there. Like, this wasn't just us creating this. Like, they talked about the scheme changes, especially the players have talked about the scheme changes. You've heard some rumblings about like McVay Shanahan stuff. You've heard some rumblings about Alabama type of stuff. I think ultimately, once we get to pads, which is a week from Monday, we think is going to be the first day of full padded practices at training camp, that's when we really start to see what this offense is actually going to look like. But at this point in time, if you had to predict, Alex, which way do you think this ultimately goes? And do you think it will be a very big difference? Like, when people turn on that first preseason game, maybe they don't give too much away then. But okay, let's say September 11th,
week one,
week 1 against Miami. What's that going to look like? Are they really going to look that different?
I mean, they're not going to have a fullback, so it'll look different, right? I still don't see them going the Shanahan route, especially with some of the offseason moves they made. Like, they didn't, outside of axing a true fullback, they didn't do a lot that lines up with that.
Yeah.
I still think it's going to be something similar to what they've done in the past. We heard that there were some former assistants in the building, right? And now I'm blanking on who they were, that it was
Bill
reported.
O'Brien was the big one.
Bill O'Brien was one, and who was the other one?
Did Jed Fish come and say hi?
Jed Fish, yeah. Yeah, that's who it was. So, I mean, those are guys that are more traditional, drop back, spread it out, right?
Yeah.
I still think that. And again, the moves they made, you bring in Devontae Parker, you bring in Tyquan Thornton, that makes Nelson Aguilar a lot more versatile. You don't need him just at the X, which is probably the best. A versatile role is probably the best role for him. Pierre Strong is a guy who can do a lot at the running back position. Isn't just a I know he was the fastest back at the combine. Usually that guy's just a burner. I don't think Pierre Strong's just a burner. I think he's a really well-rounded running back. The comp I made when they picked him was a slightly faster Rex Burkhead. I'm sticking with that. I think they go back to a little more of what it was. I don't want to say like when Brady left, because they had to make some adjustments when the cupboard ran dry, the pass catcher positions in like 2019, right?
Yeah.
And I don't want to say 2017 because that offense was so good with Brandon Cooks, right? They're not there yet. Maybe they get there, but maybe like that 2018 offense sans a fullback. Like some of that stuff, I think they go back to more of that with more of an emphasis on a modern slot. That's what I think ultimately the plan is. Yeah. And you know what I think will tell us a lot too? I think what happens with Jacoby Myers. If they give Jacoby Myers an extension, that tells us, like during camp, that tells us that they're going back to like the 2016, 17, 18 Pats, and he's going to be in the Edelman role. If not, that tells us that they're shifting to either the Shanahan thing or maybe more Alabama-like with that speed slot.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see where this scheme goes. What I am still going to harp on, and I know I'm like the RPO broken record, right? But it's not just RPOs, it's motion, it's modernizing the scheme, right? And I think that's where they really ultimately want to head, is they've got to keep up. Like they've got to really keep up with the times and the way that things are sort of broken out. And I think that's what the goal is here. And I think the other goal is clearly that between McDaniels and Brady, they were so entrenched in the terminology and the way that they did things under the former OC that it became like only those two guys really knew what was going on, right? And now that Brady's gone, especially now that McDaniels is gone, it really is difficult to teach that intricacies of that detailed of a scheme to a whole new group of players with whole new coaches, right? With a whole new group of coaches. Right. So I think the streamlining, it comes from that. But the closer and closer that we get to training camp and to next Wednesday, the more Alabama-fication murmurs are starting to surface, right? That's starting to be a little bit more out there. So we'll see what ends up happening.